main details I want to highlight is you can do alt, but you can also still utilize like some cool rhythmic choices. You can still utilize some cool spacing and movement ideas without having to just default to the every alt map must be flowy aim until the hard part where I now make the player do snap stuff. So we get to the actual alt part. For one, we already start out with a pretty cool movement idea and way of showing the song by starting with the standstill here on the pattern and then heading into the circular motion which you go against. Very nice way to variate the movement, even though we haven't even really started doing anything since the map just started. And then we follow along, same general concepts with alt of keep that cursor moving, keep that rhythm dense, keep it clickable. She spices up her rhythm with standstills again. And then I personally find this quite neat just because I feel like a lot of people will, their idea for mapping an alt map is you absolutely have to like keep the density, right? If the song's like calmed down to like super basic with like less instrumentation, that kind of thing, then people will, you know, do some gaps, do some lower intensity stuff. But here with the song still pretty much going, a lot of people would just keep going with kick sliders here, but I quite think it's a nice touch, gets the player's attention, and it breaks up the movement quite well when you utilize like when ailv adds in these gaps here. It's once again just kind of rotates back to that same idea of before, is while we're playing just the general alt experience and what people would want from an alt map, you're adding in these little moments that spice up the movement or make the player do something slightly different than the alt map they played before it. Oh, and hello, Ronkfish Baits randomness. Good day. And then, of course, just this is what I mentioned before, you know, I feel like every mapper, whether they're mapping alt or not, they would notice, hey, calm part, contrast, let's chill out, you know. And then we're back into it. But once again, I have to highlight this sort of thing here, where I feel like a lot of people would do too much here. Like, I feel like I might sound like a broken record, but the kind of a core issue is just people feel like they have to do things. Like they have to. They can't just let something sit on its own. And especially if they consciously are thinking about like a stylistic map, right? Like, I'm making an alt map, so therefore I must make sure like that it's an alt map. I'm always alternating. I'm always making the player do things. So it's like, okay, the boring part's done. Now back to alt. But adding in like the simple jumps and keeping them apart better shows the song. It better, I think it provides a better playing experience since it's a little more interesting. And it makes your map just have its own bit more of an identity rather than just, yeah, if you want to play an alt map, just load up ailv and it's just like playing PKK, the alt map. Or I'm quite old, so I can't really think of any alt mappers outside of Val and PKK. But yeah, I feel like you get the point. And then here, with as we all know, you show different sections, different contrast, different patterns. So here, ailv decides to show the verse by breaking it up into these patterns, where now we're not doing the standstill from before. We're doing these nice, not exactly the most comfortable movement. So it keeps your attention and it keeps that aim requirement high. But it's still very, very flowy. Very, very fun. And we still add in like the stacking to kind of break up that cursor. It's such a good song, honestly. Also, very cool. Very nice acceleration. We love those. And just same as before, second verse, same as the first. They would say as a English, popular English phrase. Just, I can really appreciate when a mapper decides to omit sounds and really focus on the one layer just to make that section different. Because this whole thing could have just been more alt map. You know, maybe throw in some 1-1s to not make it less intense on the player, but like packing in like so many circles and focusing on a different layer kind of makes the map almost break free of the alt category. So it's like you're alting, playing an alt map, and then you're playing like a normal like jump map. And then you go back to the alt map and back to the jump map or stream map or whatever. Lovely movement idea with the circular movement. It's also quite nice to look at least to me, but who knows? Most people say I don't understand visuals. And this lovely 1-4 snap here to start the TI is just awesome emphasis. And when the player plays that and it, like you click that circle, you're just like, damn, that feels good. And once again, difference of section. So we started utilizing these now. So they change up the aim slightly, since in the alt category, the player is just going to keep going and going and going. So it's going to be less of a standstill and more of just trying to influence the cursor to just not stop. Because very easily could have done that, but it's a pretty drastic playing difference, at least to me. I know there's probably somebody here who will be like, players won't notice that. And it's like, okay, I'm sorry. I tried my best. If they don't notice it, they don't. But yeah, it's still a cool idea to utilize. And once again, we're utilizing that pattern from before. Kind of a cool thing since you're almost using it through... since you're using it through the whole map, it just feels like this is almost like the map's gimmick. The map's like not really a concept, but it's like a gimmicky pattern that the map has as its identity through the entire time. So the player's going to see that, get used to it, and then who knows, maybe they're going to play another map and they see that pattern and they're just like, wait a minute, I know where that's from. You can ask your question, Fishbait. I am reading chat and questions are open. Honestly, you guys don't even need to be muted if you don't want to be. Like, you can ask questions anytime. That's kind of the purpose of it. Like, the idea is once I reach the end of this map, the mapper showcase or the mapper highlight will be done. So once I hit the end, it's done. So ask your questions like in any way you want. Also, nice emphasis breaking up the spacing of the 2 and 3 to catch that vocal, since it's the strong held vocal. Classic alt, very effective though. Yeah, it does sort of have like that high-low concept almost. But if you choose to check out more of ailv's maps later in time, ailv kind of just always does that sort of high-low thing. It's just a part of her maps. So there's so many other ones that'll do that same exact idea. It's a quite cool idea, and it's quite neat. You can use it very multifacetedly. When do you think is slider shapes appropriate on sounds or parts of a song? Personally, like, you could use slider shape for anything and everything. Like, you could have a basic 1-2 anime rhythm and then put the most complex I don't know, like text slider in human history on it, and I wouldn't care. It's a 1-1 slider. I would say as long as you have an idea around why you're using it, or you're trying to get a particular playing experience out of it, then just do it. There's no real strict rule to it. It's not like text sliders are only for tech maps, or what is it? What's the term? Nugent mapping? Avalon mapping? Whatever that term is. You know, like I don't see why you can't just use those in a normal map. But you kind of have to have an idea of it, like an idea for it, and a reasoning behind it, you know. So yeah, we're just alting along. I think a lot of the movement choices here are quite nifty, just with how strong the vocals become and with transitioning into the next parts. Like, this sort of thing here is quite nice. It's quite hard, but also it just feels very, very fun. Like, it's I really feel like that's kind of if fun could be a factor, like, like because it's so like a subjective thing. But if you could like give fun a number, I feel like that's kind of what's happening here. It's just ailv was trying to like take that number and jack it to like as high as they can in the fun scale by adding like a lot of these sharper movement ideas. Love this. Love this. Great way of showing the violins in the background by doing this really hard acceleration or deceleration. And here, I think a lot of people would love this, since a lot of people really love this, these sort of like repeating pattern stuff. Like doing this for the vocals because they're doing that back and forth, I think is just quite wonderful, quite a good idea. And it can be utilized in a lot of maps, because a lot of maps like repeat vocals. Like, it doesn't have to be all, but I just think it's very, very neat. Once again, very cool. Deceleration to catch the transition into the next part. Very cool. Very cool. Again, for the violins in the background, you can hear the pitches are just, you know, they're starting higher, working their way lower. So you're really exaggerating to show that. The movement itself is quite fun, not too difficult. The starting note is the highest note in most of these violin passages or sections. So having the sharp snap to them keeps that emphasized. Very cool. All right. Good night, Fish Picks. Very nice transition. Like, I think it's a nice transition not just in the way it represents the song with its deceleration of spacing and everything, but it's just really does the it kind of like signals the player that like, hey, this next section is like extremely calm, like with this heavy deceleration idea. It's almost like a signal to the player like, yeah, we're heading somewhere like super calm. At least that's the impression it gives me. And here it's just doing nice contrast. Following the vocal, just follow the most important layer to ailv, since that's kind of the point, you know, you follow the layer that you like the most. Keeping that density down. And now we transition into the 1/3. Very nice. I think this 1/3 section is quite well done. It has a consistent, like a very consistent pattern idea in the way that it plays. And one of the neat things about ailv's mapping when it comes to like different snappings is they always try to like make the transition back seamless. So since you're heading into the 1/3, like with this gap beforehand, it's not going to feel weird because you're not going directly from 1/4 to 1/3, that kind of thing. And then you have this consistent pattern idea. And then rather than like making it ultra dense or actively mapping the 1/6, that's utilizing the reverses, keep the density low. The song still is pretty calm and not so we no need to go ham. Vocals are building, so we start spacing out, but we're keeping that same pattern idea. And then once again, all about like how you transition from the 1/3 back to the 1/4. So I think ailv chose a very nice spot with that repeating vocal to head back into the 1/4. But not only did like most people be like, yeah, duh, it's the vocal is 1/4, so of course he's gonna go back to the 1/4 snapping. But it's not just going back to doing a 1/2 slider. It's about like look at the placement of where the last 1/3 is. So you have this like very sharp, noticeable angle change when compared to the previous patterns, because the previous patterns were quite just back and forth or right in front. So having that there really just wakes you up, and it introduces back the previous snapping. And we keep the same idea for the strings. Very cool. And we're bringing back that idea, the same alt pattern idea. It's like kind of like the identity of the map almost, with how often it's used, how frequent it's used. I always found that quite unique. Like if a mapper has this one pattern that they genuinely really like and it fits excruciatingly well, so they find ways to utilize it throughout the entire map. Because if this doesn't feel forced, at least to me, it fits the idea of like, I guess that high-low contrast that Randomist mentioned and asked about, or not even really asked about, but mentioned in the chat before. So I think it's quite nice. Very cool. Very cool. Very cool. Boomerang slider. For the good deceleration for the guitar pitches. Very cool. I think this is wonderful personally. A lot of people might find it goofy just because it's just giant C. But I think what's important is just it's following the guitar, but also just the movement it creates. They have the sharp, the quick 1-1 transition, like not 1-1 transition, but the 1 to the 2 transition of your cursor swinging up to there. Then it's this comfortable circular, and then you're going against that circular with giant C. So it makes it more noticeable. Yeah. Out of place visually, but it shows the guitar well. Yeah. I guess I see that, since a lot of people do pay attention to the visual aspect of it. So having that there just really makes your brain be like, hey, guitar. Same with this giant wave. Same with that one. Also, don't know if you noticed, but we have a little timing change here too, which is quite fun. But you don't notice the timing changes since it's played, it's mapped quite well. And also utilizing sliders, you can really abuse the slider leniency. Yeah, it is pretty flowy, but I think that's kind of a nice idea where you can assign movement to a particular section or assign a particular type of flow to a whole section. Since it just makes the playing experience feel more unique. That kind of thing. Then we go back to building again. Once again, I feel like I have to praise a little bit of the rhythm choice and the choice of like focusing on keeping like the gaps in the rhythm. Because like a lot of people just feel like they need to do more, but it's okay to just go for something like simpler with gaps and that kind of thing. Very cool jump patterns, by the way. And all the objects meeting in the middle. I'm sure if wanted to, probably could have put them like all perfectly in the middle, but you know, we gaming, so. Very cool stream. Follows the pitches of the violin very, very, very well. Maybe the only thing I would say about this is that the jump from the 4 to the 1 might feel a bit lackluster, since there are other 1/4 jumps that are more considerable for the key eyes. So especially coming off that guitar solo, so maybe could have been increased a bit. But then also, you know, a lot of people like to use the anti-jumps, that kind of thing. So I guess anti-jump, maybe? It's that same subtle idea again, which players may or may not notice. And there it is again. I love that. I love just having that consistent idea. It's fun. Has that mild standstill over there. Interesting cursor movement. Very cool stream as well. And I think I just want to point out that it's very, very nice to, like, you expect these to exist in alt maps and stuff of that nature. So it's not really the most groundbreaking thing, but I have to appreciate the choice of how it's placed, because rather than just doing the typical, more straight line or the more curve that like some people might usually do, since alt mapping is a lot of flow aim. I appreciate the choice of going for the more zigzag, sharper burst, or not really burst, but alt pattern. I just think it's a nice, subtle thing to do, even if it doesn't affect gameplay too much. Oh. Yeah. Violin has a wiggle feel. I honestly don't know what that means. I do kind of get what you mean, though. And as we're in the last ki, you kind of follow. It kind of follows the video game logic that, you know, a lot of video games do. As you get near the end of the game, it becomes harder. It becomes the most difficult version of the things you've already done. So as we get to the ki here, the last ki here, everything is slowly spacing out wider, but the movement itself is getting simpler. So before we had this pattern here, and if you remember, it was done the other way. So essentially the player, essentially like that. So the player would go against it. But now that we're in the last ki, the spacing's become much bigger. But we've swapped to the easier movement. That way the player can still hit it, like, comfortably. Very cool stream. Very cool. Great way of showing the violent passage once again. It's like, I think that's one big piece of advice I can say is, if you are mapping something that has like streams, or mapping something that has that sort of orchestration, or not even orchestration, just instruments that have pitches, that kind of thing. Like, genuinely, don't be afraid to like experiment with your streams. Like, there's nothing more, like, imagine if this was just like your normal stream, it didn't have like the deceleration to it. It would feel so much less filling, like less fulfilling. Yeah, it would feel like it wouldn't be representing the song as well. Yeah, it would be more boring. So, like, don't be afraid to like really test that out, you know? Test out acceleration ideas, deceleration. In that same vein, remember, you're trying to get the player to notice it. So don't just do it subtly, at least in like KIs and stuff. Don't just go for like the super subtle acceleration. Make them like really notice the acceleration. So like here, you really notice that, especially the 3 to the 1. And then you really notice the deceleration. Like, it's all about doing it with intention. Once again, could have done more on the 1-4 jump, but also people like anti-jumps. So it's kind of, what camp are you a part of? Anti-jump, or do you want the bigger, snappier emphasis onto the like downbeat or bigger sound? And our pattern comes back because repeating vocal, so repeating pattern. This, I think, is done super well. It's incredibly simple in application, but when applied to the song, I think it's a super well done choice. Changing the rhythm to go and add in the blue tick vocal, and the way that the long sliders are placed. We have that sharp snap into the corner to really emphasize the downbeat and the strength of the vocal, and then the other object in the other corner. It's also the 1-4 jump. So just it's super simple. It's like easy to understand why it's mapped that way, but in playing, it's just so satisfying, and like you can't think of like another way of how to do it almost. Like it's, to me it's perfect how it is, so how would I do it differently? Obviously you might feel different, but it's nice to have a map or that makes you feel that way a bit. Like it has those parts where it's like, yeah, I don't know what else could be here. There it is again. Repeating vocal, repeating pattern. I think that's such a cool pattern. And the way it also slowly increases spacing. And then also each slider, like each time it appears, there's different slider ideas happening. So I believe the very first time it shows up, they're all curved. The second time it's all red anchor. And then we get to this last one and we have all three. This is incredibly satisfying. Like having this nice deceleration with this big stream that's all circular flow into that last slider, which is just more circular flow. That feels so nice and buttery smooth. And then once you get there, you have that super hard snap to the one. So that one just feels insanity. You can see the mapper's clear intention of being like, yeah, that one, you know? Now we head into the ending of the map. It's still kept quite, like the spacing and everything, it's still kept mildly, like somewhat high. We're not full key eye spacing because it is calmer, but we still have like introduced some of the harsher aim ideas, I guess, for lack of a better term. Like the 5 into the 1 is pretty snappy, but then the 1 into the 2 is literally just a straight line. So we're kind of blending those like comfortable, easy to aim with some of the sharper, harder to aim as we head out the map. And we keep those lovely streams with their acceleration, deceleration for the violence. And I think this is also, once again, we talked about before, like stacking the object to kind of give it a little bit more attention, a little bit more like, hey, player, notice it. I think it's a nice touch to add it for these choir-esque vocals here. Still think it's cool that we're using this like pattern consistently. Just me. I keep talking about it. Very cool. Very, very cool. This is kind of, I think, where mappers separate, I guess, for lack of a better term. Do you care more about like how the player is going to play it and how the player is going to feel about it? Or do you care more about like what fits the song? That kind of thing. And I think this is kind of like a bit of a middle ground, because like it still plays perfectly fine as long as the player can aim it, of course. But the NCs, the acceleration and deceleration just on the two objects, like I feel very, very janky. And a lot of people don't like janky movement, you know? They want things to be smooth, consistent, that kind of thing. So I think adding that is such a nice touch to follow the violins themselves. And it's also kind of a subversion of expectation, because it's the highest pitch part right here. And in all the other parts of the map, the spacing goes quite, like the acceleration goes very hard, very big. And here, for the highest part, she chose to decelerate instead. I just think it's a lovely little subvert gameplay expectation to represent the song. Yeah, that's the map. I highly recommend ailv. Check out more ailv maps. Lots of good alt stuff there. She mapped tons and tons of like Toho stuff, which I know people love. Very cool Oriental Blossom, some K-pop. Like, just check them out. Really, they are very, very, very cool, very solid. And I feel like if you're trying to map alt, like alt style, that kind of thing, they're a great place to go to like see like somebody doing alt, but also showing like the contrast, showing the pitches, that kind of thing. So you don't have to just study like the vowel, the PKK, you know. But yeah, so there we go. Mapper highlight done.